Welcome to Corporate Cafecito, a podcast based on professional development, career growth, and respecting our cultural identity. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Corporate Cafecito. Yo soy Nayeli Suarez Guest, and today I have a friend of a friend. And, they always say the enemy of my enemy is my friend, but no, this is actually a friend of a friend. Wendy, bienvenida. Thank you for coming on, for talking. And, I know selfishly we were just talking before and I was like, wait, stop, record. Because tomorrow's your birthday. And so we don't give dates on here because, they're not produced and shared right on live. So we were talking about like tomorrow's a big one for you.
It is 50.
And so
50.
50. And when we were growing up, 50 seemed old. But I think about like my mom was like a grandmother of 41, right? Like when I was 41, I had a 6-year-old and so it's very different in one generation, how
Yes.
different lifestyles have gotten.
Absolutely. No, I look at my parents and we were just talking because I'm turning 50. It'll be my 10th year wedding anniversary as well. And it's all like within a couple of days. And I was asking my dad, where were you when you had your 10th year wedding anniversary? And they had moved to the States in 78 and it was 82 when he was 10. And he was like, I don't even remember, like it was that was the least of the things that I was thinking about, but thinking about that time. And it's like, goodness gracious, three kids, like moved to a new country, like a whole different world. And I'm like, a dog. And I live in Indiana. It's like my claim to fame.
Yeah, it's such a different lifestyle. Growing up, my dad would always say like, oh, he's like, you can't do that because that's not our culture. That's not our costumbre. That's not our customs. And I would always say, but this isn't our country. And if you wanted me to grow up like Mexico, you should have kept us there. Because you can't bring me here and then tell me I can't adapt to any of the culture here. And I think, for you, your 10-year anniversary, it's like, it's a big deal here.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it is. And my parents, I'm always saying they were very traditional and not, right? So one of the big things they kept saying about like why they moved to the United States was that so we didn't have to live in such a closed culture because they were like, oh, expectations and roles and all these things, like it will be much better for you in the United States. And yet coming here, right, it was like, wait,
too
yes,
much.
I wanted all of that for you, but like just to a certain extent. And so that push and pull, right? Of trying to like, yes, no, this is the reason why we even came here, but no, we still want you to keep some of the traditions and costumbres and things that we would do, right? Like this is what the family does. Still want that to be there somewhere, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it's funny growing up, like we always had carnes asadas, right? So we would go to other people's carnes asadas or have our tios over and whatever. And the first time I went to a non-Mexican carne asada, I was like, what? Like you guys don't make tacos too? Like it was so weird to me because it's just everything I knew. Every household I had been into had the same food and had the same like feeling or customs,
Mm.
etc. Of like, this is what our table looks like. When I married my husband who's white, and I spent the first Christmas, well, actually, I spent the first Christmas before we were married, with his family. I thought it was so beautiful. I was like, this is like a movie. They had like the roast with the bones sticking out. And I was like, oh, I'm like, that's like I wouldn't even know where to buy one or how to cook it. And I'm like, that's so beautiful. And he actually thought I was making fun of him. And I'm like, no, it's beautiful. Like, I love
Yeah.
this. Yeah.
Yeah, no. And it's that idea, right? And I mean, coming in from two different cultures, people come in multicultural, right? More than two sometimes. But it's the idea that you actually do get to pick and choose. Like I think that
Yep.
that's something that I've kind of grown into, that it's okay. Like you don't have
Yeah.
to pick one or the other. And you get to be in this beautiful place of being able to pick, like, I like this, I don't like that, right? And I
Yeah.
like this and I don't like that. And putting the two together and the
Yeah.
traditions
It's
across,
magic.
it's
Yeah.
just, yeah, it's what is it? The sum of the parts is
Yeah.
more, right, than the parts themselves.
You actually went through the journey of getting here. How much of it do you remember? Because I know you said you were little.
I actually remember a whole lot, more so than like I don't think people they're like, oh, I came when I was 4. So I was 3, cumplí cuatro when I got here. We came in July and September, right? So, but I had started going to preschool in
Mhm.
Guatemala, and so I remember class trips, I remember classrooms and all of that. And then I don't remember the plane ride, but I remember getting to my grandmother's house in July
Yeah.
in the heat of New York City. I remember it was trash day. So all the trash
Everything.
was out in the front, right? So like those are pieces that I remember. I remember the like the apartment and kind of how we lived and things like that. So I do remember a lot.
One of the things that I think was really interesting when we were chatting is like, so you get to New York, it's the middle of the summer, and you're not in a Guatemalan neighborhood.
No, no, yeah. So very strange journey, or strange to me, right? So my grandmother, who that's who we came, like she had been living in the United States for several years, then an aunt and uncle, but they lived smack in the middle of a Jewish neighborhood, a Hasidic Jewish neighborhood at that, and so everything around us, so no Hispanic, no Spanish, none of that. So learning to live in that, right? So stores would close down on Friday early, like at noon, because it was Sabbath, and then they were closed on Saturday, but they were open on Sunday, and then they were
Yeah.
open, on all the other times, and you would see people going to temple, and you would see them dressed, in very traditional garb. So just a very different world. So coming to the United States, which was a crazy world anyway, new, and then on top of that, this very specific ethnic community, right? That was not ours.
Yeah.
But that's kind of where we lived. And you had smatterings of people and other Spanish speaking people throughout. But yeah, that was so learned a lot. Um,
I always tell people, I'm like, it's very hard to describe the feeling, but when you're somewhere and you speak Spanish and you hear someone else speak Spanish, you're just like, like you feel like home, like I know them, like, I know what they're saying, or like it feels like a homecoming. Yeah.
it is, yeah, no, I think you crave the connection, right? Like, and that language is some of the things, it's one of the things that you can hear, right? And
Yeah.
so and then it's like, who's
Who
speaking?
said that? Yeah.
And and I'm all of a sudden you feel a kinship based on
Right.
just that, right? Because that's so close to home and what you miss, right? So you speak Spanish at home, but then outside it's a completely different world. And so
Yeah.
yes, absolutely, it is very it's a sense of home that you
Yeah.
get
And
to
your
pick
dad
up.
was like, no Spanish outside the house, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Like, we
It
gotta learn, we
was
gotta assimilate.
yes.
So when you get here, and I'm just going off of like things I know about you, Wendy. So I'm just gonna
Yeah.
but we talk a lot about the trauma we carry as children. And so you even developed like an emotional and an environmental asthma, like a
Yeah.
reaction to the move. How was that?
It was hard, right? Like, and I think you're like, oh, it wasn't that bad, right? And then you grow up with it, you live through it, right? So then
Yeah.
it's like, oh, how bad could it be? I lived through it. But then you start realizing and you start kind of looking. So yeah, so I had my first asthma attack probably when I was 5. So we had only been in the States for like a year or so. Um, you know, freaked my parents out because it's just middle of the
Yeah.
night, I couldn't breathe,
Like I
and
can't
like
breathe.
that's all that I could say, right? And I couldn't breathe. Off to the emergency room. And it took a while, right, to figure out what was going on. But then, yes, so I was officially diagnosed with asthma. And then it was like, okay, well, what's triggering it, right? What's causing it? So you have all the sort of environmental allergies, right? And I think part of that is just moving to a new place and your body's trying to figure out. Um, but there was an emotional aspect to it as well. So it was very much like too much emotion, right? Whatever you deem as too
Yeah.
much and I would be triggered by that as well. So got angry, got happy, like it's. So that was also part of it. And I think part of it was just not being able to fully express, right? Like what
Right,
was
and
going
to be able to
on
communicate. Yeah.
inside me, and seeing how hard it was as it was, right? So like, why am I going to contribute in my head, right? Why am I going to contribute to what's already hard? We'll just kind of keep it in, and then your body kind of says, "I can't take it."
Yeah, I can't take it. It's yeah, my dad always says, like, "Si no le das al cuerpo descanso, it will take it anyways."
Yes,
So my son had some speech delays. Now he talks a lot. So thank God he's fine. But at the
making up
beginning it was
for it.
really scary. And he would cry or like be frustrated. And he would be like, "Oh, why does he cry?" And I'm like, "Wouldn't you if you got somewhere and you couldn't speak or tell people what was wrong with you? Like, wouldn't you be frustrated and wouldn't you like try different ways to get it out?" And so, I think about that a lot, like, especially like my parents. My mom always talks that she went on a date when she got here, and the guy took her out to Burger King. And he said, "¿Quieres algo?" And she's like, "Un café." And, he was like, "Okay." And he got a Whopper. And she was like, "That was what I wanted. That was what I wanted, but I didn't know how to say it." And, she said, like,
Mm,
"Oh, that would be like the hardest part is like knowing when you want something, but you can't say the words." Yeah.
yes.
And you had little sisters with you, right?
We did, yeah, I did. So I had a sister when we moved here, she was 10 months old, so
Mhm.
she was a baby. And then my youngest sister was born here in the States. So within a year of us getting here, she
So
was
you
born.
were you were quite the role model, but it sounds like your dad was a role model too, right? Because even when he got here and he would work, he would still go to school, which really instilled like the value of education.
Absolutely. I mean, I think he had a choice, right? So it was the idea of, am I gonna he started working in a factory, so packing women's clothing
Mm.
in boxes. And it was like, is this what I'm gonna do, right? Like for the rest of my
Is
life.
this gonna
And
be it?
and yeah, and it was just like, why did we come here also, right? Like
Mhm.
to do better and have better. So he started going to school at night.
Nice.
And so he would work in the day and then he'd take classes at night and afternoon and evenings. And then I think his last year he actually went full time because he had to learn English
Mm.
and then take classes, right? So it was a lot of the English learning, never
Yeah,
having English class before, and then being able to do the classes to get his degree. But he did it even with a family and working and all of that. So definitely, I can't say I'm first generation college because my dad did it. He
that's
just
awesome.
he was
Yeah.
here. Yeah.
Okay, but where did your dad go to school?
He went to City College in New York City.
See,
So
I think that when you model it, like, I hope my kids go somewhere crazy, like where you went. So, how did you get to your university? And because it's like, to be honest, I heard about that university when my VP's like son went there, like he was like three people my senior, and I was already working. I was already in my mid 20s.
yeah, I have parents say like, "Oh, can you talk to my child to tell them?" And I was like, "You don't want to do it the way to, and this is why." So, so yeah, so I went to one of the specialized high schools in New York, right? So that was competitive, got in, and all of us, like my group of friends there, we were all first or second generation children of immigrants. Most of us were firstborn. So
Yeah.
we were
Yeah.
that. Um, but an alumni from the high school came to talk and kind of talk about the school he went to, and he was at Brown University, and
Which is
he
an
was
Ivy League.
yes.
Okay, and I don't mean to put you on the spot. What are
Oh,
the Ivy Leagues?
so I think there's six, was seven or eight. They're all in New England. So Harvard, Yale, Princeton, Columbia, um, Dartmouth, um, Brown, and Cornell.
Okay, all right.
Yeah. So yeah, so I hadn't never heard of the school, right? And so I was like, oh, let
Like,
me
sounds
look into it.
good.
The beauty of it was that they didn't have sort of minimum qualifications. Like you could take whatever classes you wanted.
Oh,
So there
nice.
was no requirements that you needed to take. And at that time, I was between science and English and wanted everything and stuff. So I decided that's the school I wanted to go, and
Mhm.
it, kind of didn't even think about like how I was going to afford it, right?
Yeah.
It was this
You're like,
thing
"I'm
that I was
going."
like, that's where I'm going to go.
They say it's a good
And
school. Right.
yeah, yeah, and it's in Rhode Island, Providence. I was in Brooklyn, New York. So I was like, I don't, the idea of like moving away from all of that was just like superfluous, right? Like I was just like, nope, this is where I'm going to go. Um, and my senior year in high school, my dad got laid off. So he was without a job for a good 9 months, 6 to 9 months. And so it was the college application process. And I was like, I know this is where I want to go. And so I'm going to apply early. And
Mhm.
it was $60 to submit your application,
Ugh.
which at that time it could have been 1,000
Yeah,
because
it should have been. Yeah, it was
I
like,
don't
that's
even
a
have
lot.
$5, right? So I'm
Yeah.
like, and but I couldn't bring myself to ask my parents
Mhm.
because then it was like I'd have to explain the whole thing.
Yeah.
So um
¿Cómo vas a pagar? Nomás para que te digan si sí o si no.
yeah, exactly. It's like $60. Do you know what you can do with 60?
Yeah.
So I didn't tell them. And I
Mhm.
applied, I say behind their back because I just did not include them in the process.
Mhm.
Um, I applied for a waiver for the $60 and was granted it and submitted my application. I didn't have my guidance counselor review anything. I didn't have any, it was
Go.
such a
Yeah.
solid, it was me, right? And that was it. I wrote my essay and one draft.
Mhm.
Like that was it. And then it was like, oh, SATs. Yeah, I need to
Like, "Oh,
take
I should
those.
take that." Yeah.
So I took the SATs and I had to rush them so that they would be there in time. And so in all of this, my parents knew nothing. My guidance counselor got called from the university saying, we have an application, we don't have SAT scores. And he came to talk to me and he's like, you applied? And I was like, I did.
Yeah.
And I'm rushing my scores. And he's like, oh, okay. And he's like, well, we'll do whatever you need to get done.
Yeah.
Um, and so I mean, so that was the whole background, right? So no one really knew. My friends knew, right? Because they were also applying to different schools. And I got in early admission. So it was like December. And I was at school. I remember I worked in the yearbook my senior year and I called home because everyone was waiting for the
The letters.
card, right, for
Yeah.
the letter. And my sister was home and she knew a little bit, right? Like my sister, and I was like, did I get a letter? And she's like, you did. Do you want me to open it? I was like, yes. And that moment, right? She's like, yep, it says this is you've been accepted early and all this. And I'm saying it out loud, right? At school. So like the eruption of
Yeah.
support from
We're
my
just like,
friends and my
yeah.
taxes and my teachers, like that's where I got it, right? And still I'm like, I don't think I can tell my parents because I
Like,
still don't know how I'm
"Let
gonna
me go
afford
with
it, right?
you." Yeah.
But I think I told them before the new year, right? So like during the holidays, somehow I was like, I showed them the letter and it was like, congratulations, it's wonderful. Like, and they're like, well, that's nice, but how much is it? And like, where is it? And
Yeah.
that's where my
They're like,
dad's
"Está
like,
muy
why are you
lejos."
gonna
Yeah.
leave home? Right? Like you could go to city college. Like I went
Yeah.
there. It was great. And you can do and it's cheap and the difference, right, in reaction
Right.
at home and then I guess different people found out in my circle, like we had some families at church. He had graduated from Princeton and had gone to Harvard. And so he knew, and then all of a sudden, like he's like, you got into
You
Brown?
gotta go.
Yeah, he's like, what are you talking about, right? And I was like, but my parents, they don't, and he's like, oh my gosh. Um, and then the same with my mother. She cleaned apartments in New York, and one of her clients had gone to Brown. And so my mom in conversation was like, "Oh yeah, my daughter got into college. She got into this college, Brown University." When her client was like, "Oh my goodness, congratulations!" And
Yeah.
and she came home that day and she's like, "This is something big, isn't it?"
You're like, "Yes."
And it's like, and she's like, "Okay, we have to figure out how to do this." Um, so that was the switch. And so, I mean, waiting for scholarships and they all came through, and it came down to my dad and whether he would allow me to move out of the home, single, not married, all that.
Yeah.
And it was my mom and him, right, having those conversations, and then came and it was like, okay, like money, we can figure out all the additional stuff and we will get you there, however this is. And so, yes, accept, yes, move forward. Um, and then and then it was like everyone was on board, right? So then it was my family, my church family, my pastor at the time and his wife drove us to drop me off at school because we didn't have a car. And how was I going to get there and things like that. But just the community around me, like, really gathered. But I mean, my parents were like, they could have said no, and that would have been the end,
Right.
right? Like, I wasn't going
Yeah.
to go on my own, but they didn't, and that was a big deal.
One of the things that we talk about is celebrating culture on our podcast on Corporate Cafecito. And one of the things that I think is really important, I remember when my nephew had graduated high school, we were looking for scholarships and we were applying to a lot that were like for Latinos. And he was like, I just don't feel like my life is that different
Mhm.
than everyone else's life. Like I feel like it's and I told him and I was like, "Oh, so how many of the football players on your high school team get picked up by their grandmother with arroz con leche because they don't want them to take the bus home because it's too late and too far?" And he's like, "None." And I was like, "That is our culture." And I think about like right now, you saying like your pastor and his wife also went to drop you off. Like that is our community, right? Like we all celebrate
Yes,
each other. We all support each other. We show up. We try to protect. We try to like celebrate the wins, but also help in getting to those wins. And I think to have that kind of like backing is it's really beautiful.
I agree. I agree. And I mean, my pastor was not Hispanic,
Mhm.
but he had served as a missionary in Chile
Mm.
for a very long time. So he was very in the Latin culture. And then the rest of my church was very diverse. And so it was like, yeah, looking back, I'm like, the beauty of that, right? And the amazingness of it. It's not even a word, but that people can gather around you, right? And that you're accepting that, right? That
Yeah.
you're
Yeah. That you
accepting
accept the
that.
help. Yeah. No, 1,000%. And so you get to Brown and you have a dorm that you
Yeah.
share. Like, you've gone from this Brooklyn apartment with your grandmother and your parents and everybody, and now you have all this space.
Yes, I felt like I was very opposite of everyone getting there. So we lived with my grandmother for like the first 2 years, and then we moved into a one-bedroom apartment for 5 people.
Mhm.
And we all
Yeah.
slept in the same room. It was like one living room and the kitchen dining room, right? So that was it. Like, you didn't really have a lot of privacy. And then we actually moved somewhere else as I'm speaking, and we had a little bit more room, right? But it was like, you always had like the door, right? That, like,
Yeah.
could you close the door? You've never had doors that closed in my
Nope.
house, right? Like,
No.
all the doors are to stay open, even if they were there. And I got to my dorm and I'm like, I'm only sharing this room with like one other person. And there was so much,
Ah.
I was like, there's so much room. I have a desk and I have a bed. And then I was like, and laundry, everyone's complaining I have to do laundry because they're used to having laundry done, and I'm just like, it's downstairs to go to the laundromat. And I just have to take care of myself, right? Like, just my clothes versus
Yep.
like, we have to go to the laundromat and take care of everyone's clothes, right? So it was a very different experience where I was like, this is so much more than I've ever had in my life. And everyone's like, "Oh, I don't have my own room. I don't have this. I don't have that." And yeah,
Yeah, like,
we
I've
were kind
never
of
had
coming in
that, right? Yeah.
on opposite sides. Yep.
Growing up, we lived in a really small house, and we always my parents always had like a two flat so that we could rent one out, and this was like a house that was a two flat. So we joke because like really it's a one bedroom house, but there was like a little room above the staircase, so my mattress laid where the stairs went like this, and so, that was my room, but my room was not connected to the house, so they always had to have the door open so that I could use the bathroom, get a glass of water. But, I never noticed it growing up, like, that was just my
Mhm.
room, and I think a lot of times, once you, once you are aware of Ivy League universities or things like that, like it broadens your scope. And
Yes.
I love that we're doing this episode now for two reasons. One, we do have a lot of young people who listen, and as they make their college selection, I think it's really cool to just know that there's so many universities out there, so many colleges or trade schools or anything, but to have that zest or that curiosity or that wanting to learn is something that we need to have, right? Like we're still
Yes.
under index in terms of graduation and masters and even degrees. So when you look at where Latins in general are, like we are still very much in factory, in construction, in farming, and
Yeah.
like those are still predominantly Latin workers. But as we continue to grow and like really establish ourselves here, like one in five people in Chicago is Mexican, one in three in LA is, and
Yeah.
so we have to dream bigger. And like I said, I never knew what the Ivy Leagues were until my boss's kid went there. But I thought I was fascinated by them, and I think it's so cool that you knew to go there.
No, it's very true. The opening of your world, like you have such a small world,
Mhm.
right? Where
Yeah,
like this is all you know. And then just like it took someone coming back and saying, "Hey, I went there. I'm going there." Like, and it's a pretty
yeah.
good
I
school.
went
I
here and I
enjoyed
went
it.
there. Yeah.
Yes, and for you to be like, "Oh, well, like if he could do it, then, maybe that's something that I could do." And just knowing about, right? Like
Mhm.
so many times my sister's a teacher in inner city Philadelphia, and we talk about just like what her kids know, right? And
Yeah,
the broadening of that, right? And so like going outside of the city to like a pumpkin patch for October, right? Or November, like kids that have never been outside of the city, right? And I mean, I think my going to Brown, and I mean, we all grow up with prejudices and things like that. And, all of
yeah,
my friends, we were all kind of trying to go to the next level from where our parents were, and we weren't all the same. There were parents who were doctors, who were lawyers, but still kind of struggling through that immigrant life. But we'd rag on the white kids, and we'd rag on the rich kids and stuff like that. And now here I was at Brown, and I was surrounded by this, and it was
yeah,
like,
that
what
was
am I
the
going to do?
environment. Yeah,
Right? Like I can still stay angry and judgmental, or I could learn, right? And people, not everyone was nice, right? Not everyone was welcoming, but there were such great friends that and acquaintances that I made there that were willing to share their life. And so
yeah.
that just kept broadening and broadening, right? And so it was like it's kind of like the movies, right? Because it's like, oh, you have a house in Cape Cod and you're inviting all of us to come for the weekend. Gosh,
Okay, I'd
never been
love to
to
come.
Cape Cod.
¿Dónde
Or
está? ¿Dónde está
yeah,
Kipling?
and things like that, right? Or just like vacations or like going to different places that I would have never imagined being. And it was the generosity, right? And the grace
Right.
and both of us, because then they would come and they would spend time with me and my family in our small, we had two bedrooms at the time, then by then. But I'm like, I had friends sleeping under the dining room table, right? In sleeping bags, because that's
That's
if you're
the
gonna
space we
come
have.
over,
Yeah.
that's what we had. and you were in New York City, and then we were in Manhattan, right? Like the next 2 days.
Yeah.
And so it was a willingness of sharing our life, right? And our worlds, and internally grateful, right? To those who were willing to do that. And my trying to do that. Like I see with my sisters, with my niece and nephew, I want them to, you know, you don't
Yeah.
have to wait until you're 20 to stay your first night in a hotel, right? Like
Yeah.
stay in a hotel when you're 6, who cares, right? Like even better. Um, but yeah, it's just a lot of different pieces of people being willing to share.
Well, I love it. Wendy, I know we've only gotten through like your education, so we're gonna have you back to talk about your career because if you think her growing up or getting here and then getting into Brown and graduating is impressive. Wait till you see or hear both what she's done since. So, Wendy, thank you. I think it's really
Thank
important for our
you.
community to dream big, to know
Yeah.
that we belong in all those institutions and more, and that we could dream bigger. So, I love that this is going to be we're going to share this episode in the fall so that people know because they're right now it's college application
Yeah.
time and this will be released soon so people can still do their applications and work through early decisions or next, even if it's for ourselves, for our kids. But education is something that they can't take away from you.
That's right. No, thank you so much. Appreciate it. And yes, dream big and be brave.
All right. Well, join us next time for Corporate Cafecito. We'll continue sharing, meeting, talking to other Latin leaders who have paved the way and are here to tell us about it. So have a good one.